Have you noticed that women have a much greater desire to learn God's Word than men? The biggest problem is for man to be the spiritual leader of the home. Mary has chosen the greater part. Luke chapter 10, verse 42. Mary had chosen the better part. Worship is better than service. Worship is better than service. Learning is better than doing. And setting is better than just being busyness. So there she is, Mary, John tells us. Why Matthew didn't mention her is a question. Some say, had Matthew mentioned her, it might have caused her trouble. And then John wrote 40 years later, he mentioned her. Now Mary had an alabaster box. Very transparent. A bottle, thin, made of alabaster. Inside was very precious perfume. How precious? A year's wages. About 300 denarii. It was very costly. What was in that bottle, if it was full, was worth a year's wages. A wealthy family. Also a Christian. You anoint a guest. When a guest comes to your house, you anoint him. Let's start out to say that. When you invited a guest, you anointed that guest with perfume. Well, one thing was they wore sandals, and when they took off their shoes from walking all day, they stunk. So it's a good thing. And they didn't have deodorant in those days. So to give them perfume made them smell better. In those days, no right guard. And it was a long way off. And all day in the dirt, at the end of the day, they came, and you would hope someone would anoint you with something to make you smell better than when you were there. You know? A car packed in a car. Guys, someone hasn't used their deodorant. And one fellow replied, "It isn't me, I never use any." I'm sorry, how that got in there. So it was a common thing to anoint a guest with a strong perfume. Made it much more enjoyable at the mealtime. Honey, we need to remember to do that when we invite guests over in case someone doesn't. We know how that is on occasion. And Mary is at the feet of Jesus. And she can't handle it any longer. And she understands what is going to happen. And she understands he is moving to his death. And she understands of something of what it means. And she understands and his resolution to go to be crucified. So you have a preparation of loving worship. So she shatters the open bottle, pours it over his head, his feet, just all over him. Covers him with it. 12 ounces. 12 ounces of costly perfume. That takes a year's wages to earn. And that's expensive. And we had trouble giving God a nickel. We had trouble giving God a dollar. She gave all she had. What a loving act. What an expensive act. What made her do that? Isn't it a little much? Did you get a little carried away? It's an act of love. An act of honor. She was carried away. Yes. She was carried away with adoring love and so controlled with worship that she couldn't deal with restraint. She could not restrain herself, but just loving Him all over with all that she had. She may not have started out wanting to do it, but as she sat at His feet and He began to talk, and He revealed to her perhaps that this was the last act that was going to happen to Him, that gave Him any sense of love and worship before He went to the cross. She just threw it out without restraint. That's the way you ought to worship the Lord. Without restraint. Have you ever worshipped the Lord in such a way that you lost all sense of constraint, of economy? Let's see how much I can come up with. Let me see. I don't know. I don't have much tonight. I gave $500 tonight to somebody. I don't have any money. I've got to keep this. I've got to keep this for other people coming. Most of us worship. Let's see. What can I afford this week? I've got that and I've got this. I can't afford that. If I give this much, it won't affect me. I'll be able to do it. We know very little about this. Unrestrained worship. Write it down somewhere. Do you have unrestrained worship? Where you just crush the bottle of perfume all over, pour the contents all over Jesus. When I saw my mom for the last time, I don't know if she knew it was going to be her last time, but I think she did. And she was so excited to see me. Gosh, you remember? She just mushed all over me. I didn't think she was going to ever let me go. You know, she never has done that. She never did that before. She wasn't a hands-on person. But when she saw me, oh Charles, oh Charles, oh Charles, and 88-year-old lady comes across, and she just hugged me and cried and wouldn't let go. And I thought, what does she know that I don't know? Unrestrained love. She was pouring out her heart. She was pouring out her compassion. She was pouring out her devotion. She was honoring the one who was going to die for her salvation. She did it for you and me. We all should have done it. Had we been there knowing what we know now, we would have poured it all out. She understood what the disciples didn't want to understand. She wasn't bound up in the kingdom and wanted all of the work to get in. She demonstrated more understanding than the disciples. She demonstrated the worship God desires. We know little of this. In our giving, we tend to respond to need. Oh, if there's a need, I'll give. But we don't give for the sake of worship. We don't know what it is to say, I don't know if there's a need or not. But I love you so much, Lord, and so grateful for your death, and so thankful for what you may have done for me. I can't restrain myself. I want to take all I have and pour it out on you. And that's the way it should be when we come to church. Hope the preacher don't preach an hour tonight. I've got to get home and watch something. I mean, all of the reasons why we can't take it any longer. It's not what will come back to me. It's your unrestrained love of giving, just an adoring, unreasonable worship, unrestrained. And we know so very little about that. We're not alone. Those dull-witted disciples. Those dull-witted disciples, write that down. verse 8. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, "What? Are you kidding me?" They got mad. What was the purpose of all of that? Just like a man. Right? Verse 9. Could have been sold and given to the poor. This is not a time for the poor, but worship. Not a time for programs. This is a time, in John 12:6, Judas made his suggestion so it wouldn't be gotten to the poor, only sold and money and put back in Judas's robe. He knew it was over. It was all coming down. And the rest of the disciples just agreed. Dull understanding. The character of worship they did not understand. I heard someone say recently, if the word worship, come and worship, if it wasn't in the bulletin, they wouldn't know why they were coming for it. Come worship with us. They have no idea what that means. And Jesus said in John 12:7. Here's what Jesus said to them. John 12:7. Let her alone. Let her alone. Rather discouraging statement, right? Waste. Matthew in verse 10. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, why trouble ye this woman? Let her alone. Why are you trying to make her feel guilty or bad about this? Why are you embarrassing her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. A gracious thing. A kind act has been done. And he knew that in just a few short days he is going to be beaten and stabbed and poked and the thorns around his head. He knew what was coming. And what a wonderful thing to do for a man who's getting ready to die. Verse 11. For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. You will not always have me. Sure, you help the poor. But this is now the time of worship. There's a time for charity. There's a time for programming. There's a time for ministry. But there's also time for worship. We need that time to pour out our resources to the poor, yes, but also pouring out to God in worship. Look, if all it did was spill to the ground, if done in worship and in love, it was worth every cent. Every cent that was poured to the ground, dropped and it fell to the ground. If it, all that did, it was worship. Excellent, Mary. Excellent. Excellent, Mary. Excellent. If nothing was ever done with it, except it spilled on the ground, if it was given in love, it is indeed an acceptable act of worship that he said was done excellently. Done. So when you do something, I don't know what it is that you do in this church. It better, it should be done in an act of worship. Instead of saying, oh my gosh, I've got to do this. Just don't do it. If you can't do it out of an act of worship, just don't do it. I can't believe you spent that much money on that. On what? Well, I could have gone down and got it for a nickel. Well, you probably could. But Mary wasn't going to waste Mary wasn't going to put something on Jesus that was worth nothing. What she did, she looked in one pocket and saw the alabaster. She saw in her alabaster box the most expensive thing she had. And I imagine there were some other things in that box that wasn't quite as expensive. I think she was so caught up in worshiping God, sitting at His feet, hearing Him talk, that it so overwhelmed her that she decided, this is the pocket I'm going in, not this one, because I want to show the worth of my worship, which happens how we do worship. Adoring worship is the most supreme act a Christian can do. Let's get caught up in the practical aspect of doing something. How much it is we give in restraint. We know very little of the kind of gratitude. When asked, Mom, do you think you have $500 you can give me? Honey, we're saving that money for something else. Honey, we've got some other things we need to do, and this is going to take everything we've got if we do this. I'm sorry. Go ask your brother. But there was no hesitation. There was no, can you just take it? We have 100 you can have. Honey,